Welcome in college baseball fans, specifically fans of the ACC, fans in the Sunshine State. Got two great schools to talk about today, Florida State and Miami. Monty, let's go ahead and jump into it. Florida State, Link Jarrett's second year, replacing, the late, great Mike Martin's heir. Uh, 23 and 31 last year, 9 and 21 in the ACC. Suffered their first losing season in program history. Missed the tournament for the first time since 1977. They did have that upset at TCU in a series win over a sliding Louisville, but all in all, I think a season that most Florida State fans would like to forget.
Yeah, it was not a great season for them. They did at one point get ranked in the top 25, at least in our poll last year, very early on in the season. But again, not many highlights. I mean, we've chosen to highlight a series win over TCU early on in the season. And then it was kind of hard to find another highlight there, and we had to go with Louisville, which isn't much to write home about last year, considering Louisville was the other team that really collapsed down the stretch, and I believe that Louisville game was the last game of the year. But they do have quite a few departures. They lose long-time catching leader Colton Vincent. It's a underrated loss there. I mean, the stats don't pop out for you, but he played 54 games, all 54 games, hit 273, 11 doubles, 3 home runs. Jordan Carrion, he was their starting shortstop. He has since transferred to South Carolina. Trayton Rank, who played in 47 games, he hit 288. He transferred to Rice. Nander DeSatis, he graduated. He played in 51 games. And then on the pitching side, you lose 2 really big arms. Really, you lose a little bit more than that once I get into it. But Jackson Baumeister, who was drafted number 63 overall to the Orioles, he made 14 starts and ate a lot of innings. Big strikeout guy, 95 K and 69 innings pitched. Nice. And then Wyatt Crowell, he didn't pitch much last year, and that's a big reason why Florida State kind of fell off the rails. He got injured pretty quick, but in 5 appearances, he was 3-0 with a 0.87 ERA. He ended up going 4th round to the Dodgers despite that injury. And then the 2 lesser arms that are still kind of a big deal. Doug Kirkland, he made 27 appearances, but Carson Montgomery, who was always somebody who had big-time stuff but never quite put it together in college. For example, I mean, last year he made 16 appearances, 9 starts, had a 7.00 ERA. Still, 11th round pick to the Padres. He ends up in the minor league system, so he's gone. So a lot of things to look at here, but my biggest losses for Florida State is going to be Colton Vincent behind the plate. Again, the stats don't tell the story of how important he was to this program. And then, of course, the 2 pitchers, Jackson Baumeister and Wyatt Crowell, are massive losses.
Yeah, and Nander DeSatis, too, I think was a name that was around Florida State baseball for a long time. He kind of had a disappointing end to an otherwise, I think, great career for Florida State. He really kind of got the error bug that spread throughout the team. I think that really kind of torpedoed the Seminole team. But, Link Jarrett, a lot of Florida State fans that I've talked to feel comfortable with Link leading their program. He's a Florida State guy, Florida State alum. And I think that this 23 and 31 season is an anomaly, and I think it's something that in a few years, Link Jarrett's going to look back on fondly as I think laying the groundwork for a lot of the things. But again, I'm just as we're kind of eager to talk about the guys that Florida State's brought in, I'm sure Link Jarrett's ready to close the chapter on this season as well.
Oh, 100%. So we'll jump right into it, starting with the backstop. I highlighted Colton Vincent as a big loss, and now we got to figure out who's replacing him, right? Let me make sure that we get the right up. There we go. So we're talking about catchers. All right. So big number of catchers. I actually thought McGuire Holbrook was going to start over Colton Vincent last year. Obviously, that wasn't the case. McGuire Holbrook was a 2022 All Big 12 player at West Virginia. He in that season, he hit 327 in 54 games with 13 doubles, 6 home runs, 43 RBIs. He walked more than he struck out. So I was fully expecting him to get a lot of game time last year. Instead, he only plays in 29 games, hits 217. So I would expect him to be the heir apparent right away to Colton Vincent, but you do have some talent behind him in Jackson West, who's an Alabama transfer, Marco Dinges, who's a JUCO transfer, and Riley Jackson, a very talented freshman.
Yeah, McGuire Holbrook kind of feels like the standard here at Florida State. Like you said, he probably should have started last year, but I think that he had a really tough transition into the ACC. But I think he's going to be back and provide that senior leadership. And I think we see kind of more of the 2022 McGuire Holbrook. Because again, I know when I got to see Florida State last year, he almost looked like a shell of himself, even in BP. So I think that he's kind of got a lot figured out. We've heard a lot of good things coming out of the spring. But again, the rope isn't very long again. You know, Jackson Ward's another talented guy. Riley Jackson, I know, was a very big get out of this class. I think he kind of pushes. He's going to be the first one after kind of McGuire Holbrook if he struggles. But I think he kind of takes a step forward again and returns kind of to form of what he was in 2022.
Yeah, and they do get Jackson West, who is a transfer from Alabama, but he didn't play much. He played in 20 games. Only had 20 at bats for the Crimson Tide last year. And then Marco Dinges, JUCO transfer, he has not played at the D1 level. And then Riley Jackson obviously hasn't either because he's a freshman. So there's a lot of unproven behind McGuire Holbrook. And so you've got to expect Holbrook's going to get the first nod. And if he is looking more like his 2023 self, you're going to see some other catchers get some action. But obviously with the catching position, it's different because there's a lot more to the catching position than there is on any other position on the field. So defense is going to matter as well.
Yeah, defense is going to matter again. I think that that's going to be what they miss the most about Colton Vincent is how he kind of led this staff, and it really kind of kept him even keeled at a time when the season was unraveling. So that's going to be a very interesting thing to watch because I think that this could get out of hand again for this Florida State staff if they don't have a talented catcher back then. I mean, we've talked about all the speed that's in the ACC now. I think someone that controls the running game is a little bit more important than a batting average, as we'll talk about later. But I really like McGuire Holbrook. I know that he's not going to be a guy that jumps off the screen, and I don't think he's going to be all ACC. But I think he can provide a veteran leader that Lake Jarrett's kind of been looking for from this Florida State staff. Like, who's going to step up and be the next guy?
Yeah, and again, he was a guy I highlighted even last year as he came over from West Virginia because Colton Vincent, again, the stats were not crazy, but they were a lot better than they had been in the past because I think he was closer in 2022 to a 200 hitter. He was known for his defense and his leadership, and he got to prove that last year by playing in all those games despite the poor season. But now it's going to be, I think, McGuire Holbrook's team for the foreseeable future unless he struggles, and then it might be a quicker hook than some other catchers might get because you do have talent behind you.
Yeah, and we'll kind of get into the schedule. I think that they have a lot to learn very, very early on in this season. But let's go ahead and move on to, I think, some of the positives because I think we can kind of quickly get down the rabbit hole about all of these guys. But the infield, obviously the one that's going to jump out to you is James Tibbs. Started 54 games for Florida State last year. And then after that, it's a lot of new faces in the infield. Monty, why don't you walk us through? I know I got to see Tibbs last year. He has a very, very smooth swing from the right side, the left side. Hit 338 for him last year. But who are you seeing to kind of take a step forward in this Florida State lineup?
Well, I think the big bat that I think is going to explode is going to be Cam Smith over there at third base. He started as a freshman. He had some really good numbers. I think a lot of people were expecting a lot more from him, even though he had a very good freshman season. Hit 8 doubles, 12 home runs, played pretty good defense over there. But I think a lot of people are going to see him break out. And I'm not sure if this is something, Jake, that you could have put in your breakout sophomore because he did do fairly decent last year. So I don't know if him having a good year is breaking out, but I think he's going to have a monster year.
Yeah. He is on the radar, Monty, just to kind of tease that a little bit. But again, I feel like we were hearing about him so much up in the Cape. Like, he kind of was one of the big names that a lot of people were following at the Cape again. And honestly, every single video I see is of Cam Smith just driving a ball. I mean, he seems to have power all over the field at that spot. I think he's kind of the big one. And then I think just to kind of get a little negative here, I mean, Florida State's defense last year was abysmal. I think it was bottom of the ACC and maybe bottom outside of Northwestern. They bring in 2 transfers. Drew Farrett, I think is how you pronounce it, from UCF, and then Alex Lodice coming over from North Florida. I think that, while they bring substantially high averages, I think that the big thing that they're going to need to do is their defense. And I know Link's a really kind of fundamentals guy, so I could not imagine how many ground balls they probably took this fall of just routine ground balls, because that was their killer last year, was these errors.
And something to mention about these two guys is we have Lodice at short and Farrow at second base. They're interchangeable. There doesn't seem to be a consensus on which one's going to be the starting shortstop. They both played shortstop as freshmen last year at their respective schools, so it could be flip flopped here on who's playing second, who's playing short. But these were two big gets in the transfer portal. These were some stud freshmen. Both hit over 15 home runs and drove in over 50 RBIs and played really well. And so, they actually had better freshman seasons than Cam Smith did, albeit you could argue they're playing in a little bit lesser competition. Cam Smith, we were talking about his Cape Cod performance. He was the Pro Prospect of the Year award for the Cape Cod, which is awarded to the best pro prospect. I
wonder where they came up with the name on it.
Yeah. He is a draft eligible sophomore, so keep that in mind. But here are his stats. You talked about it. His stats in the Cape. In 44 games, he hit 347, 12 doubles, 4 triples, 6 home runs, 26 RBIs. Just an absolute monster summer. So if he's doing that in the Cape, building that confidence, building that ability, and he's driving that ball with a wood bat. Now he's coming back, and I think that's one of the big reasons why I think he's poised for a monster year. So offensively, you got to love this infield, and I also just love the depth. Daniel Cantu, he may be the starting first baseman if Tibbs moves to the outfield, because Tibbs does often play, I think, right field. And Cantu will probably be the DH, and he's another transfer from another one of the directional Florida schools. They really rated North Florida, Central Florida, and South Florida with these 3 guys. So they really took the directional states, directional colleges of Florida apart. So you're looking at some good depth here, though, because you're moving Titan Kamara, who played in 41 games. You're moving him, and he's all of a sudden going to be a bench player. And you've got Jade Putz, who is a talented transfer a couple of years ago from Arkansas. And at first base, Lance Triple, who can also catch, by the way, is going to probably get some first base. And then you've got a really, really good freshman shortstop in Cal Fisher, who, for the reasons we talked about with Lodice and Farrow and Kamara, is going to have trouble seeing the field, but he is very, very good.
I'm excited to see Cal Fisher. He's a name that you just instantly circle. One of I think the biggest gets that Lynx had at Florida State, and I think he's going to be a guy that gets Florida State on the right path. But Jude Putz, I mean, like you mentioned, if that last name sounds familiar, his brother was Carter Putz at Notre Dame. So Link kind of, I guess, finds his glue guy there. So hopefully that can kind of translate again. But Titan Kamaka, he was, like I mentioned, one of the ones that really struggled defensively. So I think that that's going to be a point of emphasis, that if he does kind of get some playing time, how his glove has kind of progressed through the summer and fall. Because, I mean, it looked like he almost had the yips last year in the infield when he was trying to field. I mean, it was very, very tough to watch. So I think that that's going to be something to keep an eye on. But again, I think that they have one of the deeper infields in the ACC and a ton of young people. I think Tibbs is the only one that's not freshman or sophomore. So I think that there's a lot of learning that's going to be done in this Florida State infield as well.
Oh, yeah. And while we transition to the outfield and I start talking about that, I want to let you tweet out the video on Twitter here, so everyone's able to see it. But we've got another talented outfield here. Diamez Ross, Jaime Ferrer, Max Williams are likely going to be your starters. Of course, if Tibbs moves to left, that'll take Max Williams out. But again, the big name here is another long-time Florida State guy in his third year, Jaime Ferrer, and he's another talented bat. He's a pretty aggressive pretty aggressive batter, and he's going to strike out a lot. I think he only had like 10 walks last year.
Hmm.
So he's a very aggressive hitter. Diamez Ross, he's a speedster in center field. Really went through the growing pains of freshman. He's going to be your starter in center field. And then the question is who's taking that last spot there? If James Tibbs is not going to left field and is playing first base, you've got a choice between the Max Williams, Jordan Williams, and Andrew Duncan. It's going to be interesting to see who wins that battle.
Yeah, Demez Ross, I think, is a big guy to watch, as he's, I think, going to be the motor and spark plug that gets this Florida State team going. When I saw Florida State last year, he had a few kind of the balls get on me a little bit faster than they did at the level before I was at moments. So seeing how he kind of translate in, but again, he is just such a speedster. I'm really excited to kind of watch him progress as a fielder as he starts to play more. Because again, Florida State's, I think, one of the more underrated big ballparks that we talk about in the ACC. It gets kind of deep out there in left center, and he's going to be the one patrolling it. So kind of watching him progress is what I'm really looking forward to. And then Jamie Farrer out and right. He hit 324 last year for the Seminoles and was really one of the bright spots. But again, I think the defense is another big key to watch is how they progress. So excited to kind of see these guys roll through.
Yeah, and your big bats in this lineup are going to be the three guys that are returning that you're going to depend on in Cam Smith, James Tibb, and Jaime Farrer. Those three guys, I wouldn't be surprised to see them be your 3, 4, 5 hitters. They all had really good summers in the Cape. All three hit over 300. They all hit extra bases. Tibbs played in 4 less games than Cam Smith and had 1 less RBI. So you like what you see in the summer. This is likely all 3 of their last seasons at Florida State. Obviously, with Farrer and Tibbs, they're juniors. They're draft eligible. Cam Smith being a little bit older for a sophomore, he's draft eligible. So they're going to want to get a lot out of these 3 guys, and I really like this offense because you've got pop in the middle infield positions. You've got a speedster in Diamez Ross who can make plays. Then if McGuire Holbrook returns to 2022 form, you've got a really, really good looking lineup. And I didn't even mention Cantu, who is going to be the DH, and he's got good numbers. He hit 302 with 11 home runs last year for South Florida.
Yeah, we'll also likely be the leadoff hitter as we kind of start to project this lineup. And Tibbs and Farrar, I think, will be the 2 middle of the order guys with Cade Smith kind of rounding it out. But I think Lake Jarrett has a lot of flexibility with this lineup, especially with the depth in the infield and the proven bats in the outfield. I think that there's a lot to like for Florida State. And I know I'm very high on them, Monty. I see them kind of returning to glory with this lineup. I don't think they have the talent or the depth to kind of make it back to Omaha, but I think that this is a lineup that we could see kind of wreaking havoc in the ACC.
Yeah, and if everything goes as expected with the two sophomore transfers in Lodice and Farreau, who were not, because they come from smaller schools, can get overlooked a little bit, but I don't think anyone's really overlooking these 2 guys after the freshman years they had. So if those 2 guys come in and produce as expected and take the steps forward that you see sophomores take, this is a very good Florida State lineup.
Yeah, and I know that in the past we've kind of started to sugarcoat like, oh, this is the best, this is the best. I think that of all the teams, I think Florida State takes the biggest step forward. Cam Smith, I mean, glowing reviews very early. Tibbs at first. There's a ton of positives. And as we kind of transition into the pitching staff, I think that the pitching staff has a very similar story as Florida State has in the infield and outfield. Cam Leiter is going to be the headliner. Yoel Tejada, we'll kind of touch on him in a little bit. Connor Whitaker is who we project as the Saturday guy, and then Gavin Adams as the Sunday guy. I think Cam Leiter is he's going to get a lot more exposure. Transferred over from UCF, 80 strikeouts in 34 and a third innings. So I think, you take it with a grain of salt because it was kind of a smaller conference, but I think he's kind of a guy that I could see being a Friday night guy for this Florida State staff as they kind of look to eat innings as they have a lot of question marks at that back end of the bullpen.
And he's going to have a lot of pressure being, I think, the big get in the transfer portal just because of his name. That name, Leiter, should sound familiar. I believe he's the cousin of Jack Leiter. And obviously his father and uncle were both major league pitchers. So the name Leiter brings a lot of pressure, and especially if he's being expected to anchor this staff. Connor Whitaker, underrated guy. He started 8 games for them last year, ate some innings, and I Gavin Adams, by the way, big time guy. He was drafted by the Nationals, hence the hat. No, he was drafted by the Nationals in the 11th round as one of the top JUCO guys. So he is an absolute stud. So again, the rotation's somewhat improved, but you've also got some guys who could also start. And I thought it was interesting that a lot of people don't expect Yoel Tejeda to start after getting 6 starts at Florida last year. Obviously, the big number that pops out to me is he had 22 innings and walked 12 guys. He only struck out 11, so he walked more guys than he struck out, and that's never a good sign. But he's got legit stuff.
Yeah, before we kind of jump into the other starters, I mean, Gavin Adams is a guy that really is going to light up the radar gun. I think Link said he's been up to 100, and it feels like his slider is his best pitch to his ball. It's that one's kind of around 90. I think if he can translate and take that next big step going from JUCO in, that I think Gavin Adams has a chance to really kind of shine in this Florida State staff. I know he really struggled with a little bit of the walks and some of his control, but I think that it's really exciting to see how far Gavin Adams is going to grow this season.
Yeah, and a big theme you're going to see for both these two teams that we talk about tonight is JUCO transfers. And Carson Dorsey, he's a junior. He's another JUCO transfer, another option to start, a left-handed option. Jamie Arnold is a guy I was really big on heading into last season. He was a freshman, and he got the nod in their rotation as a freshman, and things did not go his way. I expect him to have a bounce back year. I mean, unfortunately, 24 appearances, 8 starts. He went 2-5 with a 6.34 ERA. He did have 49 strikeouts in 44 innings, so he's got strikeout stuff. It's just a matter of putting it all together as a sophomore.
Ben Barrett is another guy who's, I think, going to take a big step forward as a sophomore. He started 7 games for Florida State, and at times it really didn't feel like it was ready for him. I think he had one of the more up and down fastballs for Florida State, and I think it really kind of came back to bite him at the time. So if he can kind of channel some of his consistency and the pitching coaches can kind of work with him, he's another guy that I could kind of see sliding into that Sunday, Tuesday night role that would really kind of give these Seminoles a lot of leverage to use this bullpen. So he's a big guy. Again, he's 6'4", 230, I think is what Link was saying in the fall. But it's exciting to see kind of how Link has gone and tried to rebuild this pitching staff, because there are a lot of low risk, high reward guys.
So how do you feel about this staff overall? I know you really like the lineup. You think the lineup is a bigger reason why you're high on them, or the pitching staff?
I would say, honestly, the pitching staff. I mean, the lineup, we knew what we were going to get with Cam Smith and Tibbs at first and at the corner. But I think that when I really dove deep into this pitching staff, they have a ton of guys that I think can eat innings for them. And as we saw with Virginia Tech last year, if you have a talented lineup, you really can trust about 5 or 6 arms. And who they kind of brought in and who I think takes big step forwards, I think that you have to feel a lot more comfortable about Florida State than you did this time May, June of last year.
Do you mean Virginia Tech 2 years ago?
they were even worse last year. They only had 2 pitchers last year.
Yeah. So but as you can see, the pretty decent bullpen. You're bringing back 2 guys in Armstrong and Oxford. You have a ton of freshmen down there at the bottom. You can see 5 freshmen there. I believe Jacob Marlowe, the left-handed junior pitcher, he's a transfer from UCF as well. Yep, UCF. He is injured to start the year, so I think he's going to take some time to get in there. But I'm not as sold on this bullpen, and the reason is they're going to have to rely on a lot of freshman arms. But then again, I'm also not taking into account some of these guys on the left side of the screen that are going to be moved into the bullpen if they're not starters.
Yeah, Hudson Rowan, I think, is, we kind of talk about all these freshmen, I think he's the name that really kind of jumps out to me. Lefty, I mean, Link Jarrett said he has a plus fastball that I think is going to play really well. But again, I don't know how much they're going to use them. And Matt Sasser, I think, is another guy that you really kind of have to worry about if you're Link Jarrett, because there's a lot of guys here that I think can learn valuable experience. But again, How much do we see from Marlowe? Do they kind of limit his workload? I think is kind of the one thing to watch. And then Armstrong, I believe, was just an inning eater last year for Florida State. He pitched, I think, 60 innings for him or something like that. So if he can kind of get in that role again where he's the bridge guy, I feel a lot more comfortable. But again, if they start getting near the bottom of this, it's going to be kind of worrisome for Florida State.
Who do you think is going to be their closer out of this group? If I was have to hazard a guess, it would probably. I wouldn't be surprised to see Tejeda there early, but if he's having trouble walking guys, I'm not sure that's going to be the case.
Tejeda, I think if Tejeda pitches good, I could see Gavin Adams just because of his plus fastball sliding into a closer role. Andrew Armstrong, I think if he can figure out a lot of stuff. But again, I don't think they really have a closer right now. Jacob Marlowe can throw strikes when he's healthy. I could see him as kind of a setup closer guy, but I don't think that there's a definitive, shut the lights off when you leave ninth inning kind of guy.
Yeah, they're going to have to figure that out pretty quickly because from my point of view, I don't see it yet. Obviously, Link Jarrett's going to know more than I do, and he's one of the best coaches in the country, so I expect them to find somebody, and I wouldn't be surprised if Andrew Armstrong gets the look first just because he's the most experienced reliever coming back. Maybe that's Jamie Arnold getting a shot there in his bounce back year. So we'll have to see. It's going to be an exciting year for Florida State and this pitching staff. A lot of question marks, but a lot to be excited about. All the transfers they've got. They've got to have the best transfer group in the country.
How do you feel about Yoel Tejada right this moment? Would you trust him to kind of be a 7th, 8th, 9th inning guy, or do you think his leash is going to be very, very short?
So this is assuming that I haven't seen him throw strikes, and obviously, again, the pitching staff or the coaching staff's going to know whether his command is better than it had been at Florida. But right now, I would imagine his leash is going to be pretty short. But transitioning to a bullpen role from a starting role and being able to throw even harder coming out of the bullpen is going to be pretty special if they can harness that command.
And then, Monty, before we jump to the schedule, there's your answer for the Cam Leiter.
Oh, there we go. Yep.
And then we'll do ceilings, floors after schedules. So if you want, let's go ahead and transition to that schedule graphic, Monty. They open up with Butler. And then the non-conference, I mean, I know they are in Florida. It leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, they play a very underrated Illinois team. I think that, but they only play them once. They play a series against UNO, University of New Orleans. Again, I think another pesky team. But I think the meat and potatoes of this is going to be that midweek with Florida and then all of these ACC series.
Yeah, they should have three. They have 3 midweeks with Florida. It's kind of a creative way for them to get a series in with Florida, where the traditional in-state rivalry where you do the home, away, and neutral. So that's going to be fun to see. I think Florida took all 3 games from them last year. In terms of the non-conference, that's got to be the fun one. But Florida State has a tendency to drop games midweek, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. ACC schedule, it's looking like it could be a fun one. They got Miami the 11th to the 13th at home. Wake Forest on the road, that's going to be tough. Duke on the road, that's going to be tough. Clemson on the road, that's going to be tough.
Yeah, and Pitt in that spoiler roll on the road as well. I think that's going to be a tough series. They always seem to kind of play better when it heats up. NC State, I think, is a big one too as well to kind of watch out. And I think that there's a lot to like about the Florida State ACC slate and a lot to not like about their non-conference slate.
Yeah, and here's the thing: is we talk about these schedules and we highlight the ACC, it's gonna beat itself up.
Yeah,
we highlighted the Pitt series just now. That's normally, again, when we previewed Pitt, they're not going to be a great team. They're not going to be a tournament team, most likely. But they are going to fight, and they're not going to give you an easy win. And that's indicative of the entire ACC. After Wake Forest, I think you have a lot of teams that are right within each other that can beat each other up, and I think that's exactly what's going to happen week in, week out in the ACC. That they're just you're gonna be high on a team one week, and then they're gonna go in and get beat next week.
Monty, I'm gonna retire this one. I think that's too early for Pete's Freight's Classic, Boston College, the 5th, 6th, and 7th of April. No potential for Pete Freight's Classic for Florida State.
Is that why you were just laughing to yourself right before you said that?
Yes,
you were just
I was
laughing at your own.
Because you got me last week when you were like, every week you bring up Pete Freight's class. So no Pete Freight alert for Florida State.
So naturally, that's when they're going to schedule it. They're going to watch this and be like, just to prove Jake wrong.
Yeah.
But this Florida State team, they got some tough opponents in on the schedule. So it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, a lot of Florida teams because it's the lot of teams to play in Florida, and none of those teams are easy to beat.
I do want to commend them because I think that they're the only power Florida school, and we'll talk about it with Miami, that's leaving the state of Florida to go play in that tournament with Illinois, Michigan State, and Western Michigan. So kind of an interesting scheduling caveat. Kudos to Florida State for scheduling something outside of Florida. I know that's tough to do for these schools.
Yeah, especially that early in the season when they've got the weather. Are we sure that tournament's not in Florida? Where's that?
It's in Greenville, South Carolina.
Okay. I was just making sure. It'd be funny if we were talking about them leaving the state and then it's a tournament in the state of Florida. So
in the state of Florida, no, I think it's in South Carolina.
All right, so let's move on. What's your floor? What's your ceiling for the Florida State Seminoles?
Ceiling, I think, is they host a regional. I think that they have the talent and they have just enough pitching to get it over the hump and host regional. And their floor is what happened last year. It was a nightmare. Everything could go wrong scenario. But again, that could happen again. That could be Florida State's new reality, like we've seen with Mississippi State. So I think my prediction, I think that they're a very, very dangerous 2 seed, and they give an SEC teams fits as a 2 seed in a regional.
Man, my floor is not last year. That would just be mean. So it's going to be interesting to see with Florida State. I think their floor is kind of in the range of on the bubble. I think they are a very, very good baseball team. I'm pretty high on them as well. And then I think they have a monster year and could host as their ceiling. But prediction wise, I think they're going to be a 2 or 3 seed. Very dangerous, and it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely going to be an exciting year for Florida State. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they retire their all gold set of uniforms, as I think those are one of the ugliest in the sport, of the gold jerseys on gold pants. That's kind of my hopeful ask, is that they retire those. And
I was going to say, before we move on to Miami, Charlie Cohen thinks we're too low on Georgia Tech, which I don't. Is it because we overlooked him when we were talking about the series, or I'm not sure we mentioned anything about Georgia Tech, and
maybe it was the lack of mentioning.
Maybe it's a lack of mentioning. Yeah. We did do a preview on Georgia Tech a couple weeks ago. I think they could be a dangerous team, Charlie. So it's just a lot of unknowns with some of the recruiting class they got. They got a really good recruiting class, but are those guys going to immediately produce as freshmen? And then, of course, the pitching side's got to show me something, which they haven't shown in a couple of years. So I don't want to be low on Georgia Tech, but that's the way it is. Sorry to segue a little bit away from our main preview. I just wanted to address that so people know that we're paying attention to the comments.
Yeah, and I'm high on them. I had one of their players as a breakout sophomore today, so I think that they have a very talented freshman class. But I don't know with Georgia Tech. But let's go ahead and move on to Miami. Let's get it back.
Yep. We are heading to Miami, and the first question: do you remember what we have them in our preseason ranking? I know where I had them in my tiers.
Let me see where I had them in my ranking. 7.
7. Okay. And we'll talk about a little bit about why. In Miami, I had them kind of I had the top tier being Wake Forest by themselves, and then I had those other teams that we've ranked in the top 25 in the contenders range, and then I believe I had Miami, Florida State, Louisville, and Virginia Tech in this kind of dark horses situation. So it's going to be interesting to see. But
Yeah, I have them above Duke, BC, NC State, just behind Florida State and Louisville.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. There's again, the problem with some of these teams is so hard to figure out where I'm going to rank them because there's so many new faces and they've lost so much. And we'll get into it here. It's going to be JD Arteaga's first year as the head coach, but he's been there 21 years as the pitching coach. So it's a nice transition there. Staying in house shouldn't be too much of a difference in that. And then last year they were 42-21. They went 18-12 in the ACC. Just missed out on the Coastal Division Championship to Virginia. The highlights include series wins over NC State, North Carolina, and Duke, which all tournament teams. They beat Wake Forest in the ACC tournament semifinals to advance to the finals, where they fell to Clemson. They were the number 9 overall seed and hosted a regional. Unfortunately, University of Texas took them down twice to advance to a super regional, and that ended a very good season. They lost a lot of talent.
Yeah, but before we it did kind of feel like that regional Miami was kind of the underdog in their own regional, just because Texas, I know, kind of slipped there at the end. But I think that Miami earned the right to it. But again, there's a ton of talent. Obviously, the big one, Yo-Yo Morales started 61 games for them, 408 average, went to your nationals. So I guess it's just the Monty show. Their best hitter by average, best hitter by home runs, and best hitter by OPS in 2023. Sorry if that sounds like I'm reading it, but there really is no superlatives for what he meant to this Miami program. He was the mainstay the last 2 years on campus. He's a name that I think Miami Hurricane fans are going to miss for a ton, and they're going to talk about for a lot. But there's a lot of other names here, too.
Well, I was going to say, I'm going to still talk about him because he's having a great early pro career for the Nationals. I always felt like he was a better pro prospect than he was a college player, and as you just read the stats, he was a monster college player. Yeah. So I was psyched when the Nationals got him 40th overall because he was first round worthy and just dropped. So it was a very lucky grab by the Nationals to get him. But that he wasn't the only player drafted for the Hurricanes. A lot of their production is gone.
KJ Kafis is another name that was drafted 3rd round to the Guardians. He started 62 games, hitting just about 350 for him with 13 home runs. Dominic Patelli is the 7th round pick of the Reds. I know that they were very, very excited to get him in the 7th round there. 294, another guy who kind of feels like he projects better as a pro prospect. Zach Levinson started 63 games for him, 5th rounder to the Cardinals. Andrew Walters there's just so many guys here. It's tough to.
You're fine, but Andrew Walters was the best closer in baseball last year.
He was ridiculous. Carson Ligon transferred to Mississippi State. Alejandro Torres is gone. Alejandro Rosario, 5th round pick of the Rangers. Carlos La Quinta, I think is how you pronounce it. Or Laquera. And then Ian Farrow, who started 40 games for him, transferred back to Florida Gulf Coast. I'm excited to kind of see the next page in Miami baseball as we kind of turn the page on this last season for the one last time. JD Arteaga is a tremendous pitching coach. I know that I had a few guys I've talked to that played in the ACC, and they said they always hated going against Miami because it seemed like every guy they brought out of the pen threw 98. I mean, he knows how to recruit guys who throw gas. He knows how to get the most out of the staff. I know that there's not a lot of big name guys in this pitching staff, but I think it's somebody where you kind of have to do like we're doing with Vanderbilt. You have to trust JD Arteaga as he's built the staff and he's been around Miami baseball so much that I really think that that's not really a worry that Miami has to worry about.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because as I was doing a lot of our research for this, it was just trying to figure out who a lot of these guys are. There were a lot of guys that got playing time for Miami in very, very limited roles that are going to have much bigger roles. Like we just named a ton of guys. I mean, Morales, Kafis, Patelli, Levinson. Those are 4 of your 5 biggest run producers. If you Blake Sear being the 5th one that is coming back, that is a lot. Ian Farrow, he kind of faded, I think, towards the end of the last season and ended up transferring back, and was another big guy that you lose. So there's a lot to replace here for Miami. So there's a lot of unknowns, and we can get into it for the lineup.
Yeah, man.
Here.
If you want to pull up that graphic again, it's a new era of Miami baseball. I think that and hopefully it's one that kind of returns back to Omaha, as I know that it's been a little bit of time for, especially as a program that's as storied as Miami is, that they haven't been to Omaha more recently. So hopefully this is something that we see Ortega to kind of get them back. Starting off behind the plate, Carlos Perez is kind of the big headliner. The average really wasn't all that glaring. Hit 210, started 58 games, 13 home runs for him. I think he's going to be the veteran guy behind. And then AJ Goitia, the freshman too, as well. I think he's kind of another name that you see push for playing time as well.
Yeah, and Jack Scanlon's really there for his defense. He's not a strong hitter, so I wouldn't be surprised to see AJ Goitia pass him in the depth chart at some point. But to have that happen, you would need Jack Scanlon to play a lot. I don't expect him to play a lot. Carlos Perez is going to be the guy. He's returning. I think he's going to have a much better year than last year. It's his senior year. That's another guy that you can potentially put in your for the love of the game award. Yep, for the love of the game award. So it's Perez's job. I expect him. He played 58 of the 63 odd games last year for him. I expect him to play about that amount or all of them.
Yeah, and he's another guy that I think is kind of in there for his defense and how he can kind of lead a staff. And as we'll kind of segue into the next part of the infield, he has kind of the flexibility to be a glove first guy. Jason Torres is who we project to start at first. Daniel Colvett is a freshman who we project to start at third. Really, really big recruit over there. JD Urso and Blake, I know I'm going to butcher his name.
Blake Sear
up the middle are kind of the two names to watch. And again, Antonio Jimenez and Doran Gonzalez are kind of the two other names to watch. But again, I think it all starts with Jason Torres. I mean, he hit nearly 500 in very, 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 very limited exposure, only 17 games for him. So I did want to caveat that, because I know that that's kind of the big thing that you come over. And then JD Urso is, I think, another guy coming over from Tampa, hit 400 for him. Kind of watching and tracking how he plays. I think he's another guy that's kind of an underrated transfer for him.
That being said, one of our followers, he's not showing a name on here, does not think he's going to start, which may be the case. These are just projections, and I could very easily see Antonio Jimenez starting there. I mean, he's the number 72 overall prospect coming out of high school. Obviously, you mentioned the person commenting mentioned it before. The big loss that they're going to have trouble replacing is Dominique Patelli for his defense. But Antonio Jimenez could be the starter at shortstop just as well. JD Urso could shift into a DH role. But the big name out here, it's a shame his defense isn't a little better, because he could play short if his defense was better, but he had some trouble playing second base defensively last year. But that's Blake Sear, who is a monster. As a freshman, hit 306, 12 doubles, 17 homers in 59 games. So he's going to be the big returning bat for this team. Middle of the order.
I think on the Miami website, he was one of 3 freshmen to ever hit 17 home runs. The other 2 were Ryan Braun and Pat Burrell. So 2 guys who played in the big league for a long, long time. So
MVP.
Excited. Yeah, I know that they always like to throw those in there, but I think he's an exciting guy to watch. And I think that there's a lot to like here. JD Urso, I know that they projected him to not start, but I think he kind of makes that big jump. I mean, Tampa is a very, very talented D2 school, so I'm excited to kind of see how he does it.
Yeah, and Dorian Gonzalez over there at second base, he can play second base, shortstop, wherever he needs to, but he got a lot of time last year but didn't produce a whole bunch. He hit sub 200 at 193 as a sophomore. You're looking for him to make a big jump. He did have 88 only 88 at bats. So even though he played in 53 games, it sounds like he was a big 50 a big defensive replacement. So he may start. It sounds like that's what somebody, one of our Miami fan insiders, is looking at there.
Renzo
So
Gonzalez, I think, is another name that you kind of look for to get a lot of quality at bats. As he's kind of a lefty platoon that I think really kind of struggles to hit left-handed pitching. But when they face a lot of these righties, I think he's another guy that you could kind of see either at first DHing or in a corner outfield spot. But this is Miami. This is definitely the strength of this team is this infield.
yeah, and we didn't talk about him enough, but Daniel Covett, the freshman over at third base, he is a big boy who can hit to all fields, and he has the ability to get even stronger. He's going to be an absolute stud. He was the number one third baseman recruit in the country, number 36 overall. An absolutely massive get for Miami over there at third base. So in theory, you could see them start two freshmen on the left side of the infield in Covett and Jimenez.
Yeah, and Jimenez, the arm strength is, I think, another thing that really jumps out at him. I think that's everything I've seen from Miami, just on Twitter, is how hard he throws the baseball. So interesting to see kind of how that translates to the college game. But again, Monty, let's go ahead and talk about this outfield. I'm kind of chomping at the bit to talk about this outfield. Obviously Zach Levinson is who started here, but I really like Jacoby Long in center field. I know that he's kind of been an underrated guy for him. He was supposed to be this big time recruit. Really hasn't lived up to the billing in terms of MLB draft prospect at 313 for him and only 64 at bats. So seeing how he kind of takes a step forward is one that I'm really, really excited to see. Lucas Costello coming over from Wake, and then Lorenzo Carrier in right are who we project to start. But I'm really excited about this Miami outfield.
I think this is the year for Jacoby Long and Lorenzo Carrier, who have been on campus for a while, to have big years and really show what studs they are. These are two really talented players who haven't quite gotten the opportunities to show stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch these two guys play baseball out there. And then you've got a lot of depth in this outfield. Lucas Costello, like you just mentioned, coming over from Wake, it's driving me nuts because I was on Wake's website. They have not updated it, so the first player on their roster is Lucas Costello, who is currently in Miami. Drove me a little nuts. But Edgardo Villegas, he played in 60 games last year. Gabby Gutierrez is a junior who can play out there, and then they're really high on this freshman Jake Kulikowski, who can play center field and has some speed. And again, it's just going to be hard to say whether or not he's going to get the playing time with all those guys ahead of him.
Yeah, and then Renzo Gonzalez, like I mentioned, good. But, Lucas Costello, I mean, that's a guy who went to Omaha last year, was a big part of that too. So I think he's a very, very good bat. Again, I think he doesn't strike out a ton, on base machine. I'm really excited to kind of see what he does as he kind of, I think he helps Jacoby Long and Lorenzo Carrier kind of be professionals in Miami as he brings that kind of big league approach. But I really like what we're going to see because, again, there's just so many guys that Miami I think could throw in here that it's going to be, a fight at the bat rack to see who starts out in the outfield.
Yeah, and there's some question marks on the hitting side, but overall, I feel pretty good about this group. I feel pretty decent about them. There's some question marks, but if we're expecting Jacoby Long and Lorenzo Carrier to take big steps forward, I'm feeling really, really good about this team.
Yep. And as our Twitter nameless Twitter fan has kind of mentioned as we transition into the pitching staff, here's where I think a lot of the issues for these Canes could arise. Greg Zeal is who we project as the Friday night guy. Rafe Schellinger is the
Slicing.
Saturday guy, and Henrik Hernandez is the Sunday guy. Greg Zeal, I think, is a guy that you really have to watch out for, as he's been up to 96 in the fall and has just a biting slider. I think he's, a little bit unproven, but I'm really excited to see kind of how he takes a step forward because, again, I don't think that there's a lot of pressure on this Miami staff. I think that they know what they are, and I think it's a pitching that kind of allows you to go free and easy. But I'm excited to see Gage Zeal kind of take that next step.
You didn't say he was unproven, did you?
He's a little bit, right? Wouldn't you
Uh,
say that?
s- 16 starts, 100 strikeouts, 21 walks, 92
Maybe
innings.
that's not. Maybe I need to get better at my superlatives. I ran out of them
Yeah.
for. I ran out of them for Yo-Yo. I guess I just need to get better ones for Zeal. I think in a national sense, he's kind of unknown and unproven. For a
Yeah, I
Friday night
mean,
guy, do you think he's proven to be a Friday night shut down the order kind of guy?
not necessarily, but I mean, he was the only consistent starting pitcher I felt like last year for him.
Yeah, I get just calling me out, Monty.
Yeah, so yeah, that's my job. Rafe looks like he's going to make the transition from the bullpen into the rotation. I believe he had a pretty good summer at the Cape. Um, but yeah, them losing Carson Ligon when they already lost Rosario and Andrew Walters and those guys to the draft, and losing Ligon to Mississippi State was a big loss. A guy that we should talk about who could be a big name is another guy, a graduate transfer from Lynn University. It's Division II school. He could get a crack at the rotation. Herrick Hernandez is obviously a JUCO transfer. We don't have too much information on him. He's supposed to be a big arm. But Dwyer, in 13 appearances last year for Lynn, he went 4-4 with a 2.59 ERA, 94 strikeouts in 80 innings. Hitters only hit 192 against him. So he's a very, very capable pitcher as long as he can stay healthy. I know he's had issues in the past. And then
The thing
Ash,
that I think worries me about Dwyer, though, is as he was kind of a power pitcher as he ran the ball up to 97 and uses his fastball a ton. I think that's really the only thing to kind of see how that translates to the ACC. Because again, I think at the lower level of baseball, you can rely on your fastball a lot, but I think that could kind of get him into a little bit of trouble. So I think we always talk about, hey, take these stats with a grain of salt because they're D2. I think this is one that you really, really have to take with a grain of salt as he is a power pitcher and he can go out and kind of dominate people.
yeah, and the other name that I don't think is really going to get too much of a chance early on is Ashton Crowther, and I didn't do this right on the screen. It should be a redshirt freshman. He's not a true freshman, but he is somebody they could see being a starting pitcher for him down the road if any of the aforementioned guys struggle. But now this is where it gets the question mark grows here as we move on here to the bullpen. Now, remember, for the last couple of seasons, they've had an elite closer. I mean, typically you don't see closers getting drafted in the top 2 rounds, and Andrew Walters was an absolute stud, and he got drafted in the second round. So somebody's got some big shoes to fill.
Yeah, and it's not as straightforward as you would like it to be. I think Nick Robert is the name to kind of circle to maybe fill that role. But again, I don't think he's kind of a dominant closer type. I think he's kind of more of an eat up in innings. And then Slade Naturman, I think, is another one that could kind of take on this role. But again, he's never really pitched it like this in Miami. And I think he's gonna be a guy that needs to be in the program a little bit longer.
Yeah, thank you to the nameless Twitter follower who just let us know that Crowther is coming off an injury, so he's certainly not going to be getting a chance early on in the season. But they've got some talented freshmen in Jordan Vargas and JT Caruso. Brian Walters, he's the younger brother of Andrew Walters. He hasn't gotten much of an opportunity yet, so it's unlikely he has quite the same talent level as his brother, but there's another option. And then again, you've got another JUCO arm in. We already talked about Naderman, but also, Julian Hernandez is not a JUCO transfer. Slade Naderman is the
Yeah,
JUCO
Slade's
transfer.
the junior college guy.
Yeah, I keeping track with these two schools. None of the schools that we previewed before had as many JUCO transfers, so it's hard keeping track of who came from JUCO and who hasn't.
Yeah, it's definitely because those JUCO stats are so hard to find as well. I think JT Caruso is another guy that I think is a contact first pitcher that could eat up a ton of innings. He's another guy to kind of watch as an underrated one. But man, this is a tough bullpen to kind of project where they go.
Yeah, and Chestnut's another innings eater. He was somebody who just 8 innings last year, didn't have the best numbers, but they trotted him out there for 63 innings. He did go 7-0 despite a 5.71 ERA, but I think that says more about their lineup than it does about his pitching.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that it's kind of the same thing again this year with Miami, that if this bullpen can kind of hold them around that 5, 6, 7 window, they're going to be in a lot of games. But again, it's easier said than done with a staff like this. So I think it's going to be a very, very interesting season in Miami as we kind of transition into their schedule. They open up with Arkansas's second favorite team, NJIT.
The New Jersey Institute of Technology.
They actually just got a brand new field, but
it
won't
doesn't
matter because
sound
they'll
like
be in Miami.
It doesn't sound like a real school, and every time I think I don't want to offend anybody, and I'm sure it's a great school, but I just think of the made-up school in the movie Accepted, where it's the South Harmon Institute of Technology, and I think of the New Jersey Institute of Technology the same way. Apologies to anybody who's listening.
All right, Monty, close your eyes. When is the first time Miami leaves the state of Florida? What weekend?
Second weekend of ACC play.
Yes, that is correct. You cheater. They do
I did
not
not
leave.
cheat.
They do not leave their stadium for any of their midweeks, which again, they play in Miami, so that's kind of to take. I'm sure Hawaii does the same thing, but I think that they play a little bit of an underrated kind of non-conference slate. They play Florida Gulf Coast, who's given Florida State fits in the past. They play Florida Atlantic, who was another one that I think gave people fits in the past. And then that big weekend there at Florida, go ahead and circle that one. I'm excited to kind of see that. That's when we'll really get to see who Florida is, and we'll really get to see who Miami is as well.
That May 2nd to May 4th game where a lot of ACC teams are off for exams. It's interesting. Miami's going to be hosting BYU. It just seems like a very random opponent there for their for their exam break.
Yeah, and BYU is again coming to Miami. So if you were worried about them traveling out of state in their non-conference, no need to worry, Bonnie.
Yep. So it's a pretty routine schedule. The teams they play in the state of Florida, yeah, they're not leaving the state of Florida, but they've got some good baseball teams, some tough teams. I mean, Florida Gulf Coast is a team that can, in many years, is a top 25 team. So, and then of course they're playing Florida in a 3-game series, and we already have their consensus top 5 team. So it's going to be.
They open with Virginia, North Carolina, and then a road series in early spring against Notre Dame. I think that's arguably one of the toughest 1, 2, 3 weekends in the ACC. I think that Miami will need to get off to a hot start and kind of steal as many wins as they can earlier, because down the stretch, I mean, it gets a whole lot easier. They play Louisville, who missed the I know I'm high on them, but in fact the matter is they missed the ACC tournament last year. Georgia Tech, who's starting a ton of freshmen. Virginia Tech, I mean, we talked about their pitching before, and then close with our consensus 14, Pitt. So it's an interesting slate. I think that this could kind of be a team that you see on the rise, winning series in a row down the stretch. There's a lot to like about this Miami schedule from a winning standpoint in terms of building a great resume.
You know what's interesting? I would like to point out that I said the second weekend of ACC play. It's the third weekend of ACC play, so I was wrong. I
thought they played North Carolina second weekend.
Right, that's at home. That's at home.
It is at home. Oh,
yeah.
So their first road trip is to South Bend. What a great welcome to the road.
Yeah. The series I really want to circle is that Virginia series. The last 2 seasons, that Virginia series has been really interesting. A couple years ago, the last time Virginia went down to Miami, Virginia was a top 3 team at the time. And that was really the point in 2022 where the Virginia Cavaliers got humbled a bit, and they kind of just slid a little bit from there and ended up being a 2 seed. They got swept in Miami. Last year, Miami came to Virginia, and Virginia returned the favor. So the way that those the last couple of series is gone, it's a big series, because if one of them sweeps the other again, the home team sweeps again, that's going to put Virginia in a pretty big hole, or vice versa. So I'm circling that Virginia series right off the bat, because that's a tough test for Virginia to start their ACC campaign in a place where they don't play very well.
The one that I'm circling is that Virginia Tech one, just to kind of highlight how far the ACC's come since 2022 when Miami and Virginia Tech were 1 and 2 in the ACC, and that was the series that kind of decided it. And now, honestly, it's a series that really doesn't mean a lot in the ACC in the grand scheme of things. And I think that that's one of those series that I kind of look at as, wow, the depth of the ACC really is there. But that's the one that I'm circling because I think that that's going to be not an elimination game by any stretch, but I think that the winner of that one will have a leg up on the other team that they beat.
Yeah. So transitioning, we're gonna wrap up here with ceiling and floor. Yeah. What are your thoughts there, Jake? I know you just highlighted our guy's comment there.
I think the ceiling until they prove me otherwise is making a regional and hosting a regional because they really, really struggled to get out of that second weekend. I think that their floor, this one doesn't feel like it's very hit or miss. I think their floor is like Virginia Tech last year, where they are in the mix very, very late, and a few things don't go their way and they get left out. No one's really mad that they get left out, but I think that that's kind of where they sit is in that 7, 8, 9 range of the ACC. Do they get in? Do they not get in? But very, very low on Miami, but also their floor is a lot higher than I thought that they would have been after the deep dive.
It's interesting that he pointed out FSU because I'm having trouble imagining Miami being in that same situation, but that would have been the case last year. It would have been hard to imagine Florida State doing that. So, I mean, if everything goes wrong and all those question marks that we've brought up don't go the right way, in theory, they could go that way. It's just so hard to imagine. So I'm having trouble really convincing myself that's their floor. But it very well could be. And
they're still Miami, which again,
yeah,
you said that. I mean, Florida State hadn't missed the tournament in 50 years, and they missed
right.
it.
So yeah. So, but I think they might have the widest range for me on.
So they're completely up. We're going completely different directions here.
I was saying they could host, or they could miss the ACC tournament. Like they have there's just so much that I have no idea where to predict Miami.
Do you think they win a regional that they host?
No, I think if they win a regional, it's going to be as like a 2 or 3 seed when they're not the favorite. That just seems to be the Miami. Like that's just going to be the way.
This doesn't feel like a team that's built for the tournament. It feels like a team that's built for ACC play.
I don't know how this team is built. There's a lot of question marks that I want to see before I can tell myself that. But I think my prediction is they're gonna make the ACC or the ACC tournament. They're gonna make the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament. I think they're gonna end up being a 3 seed somewhere.
All right, Monty, I think that's all we have time for is we're just a hair over an hour. We got CBC Texas tomorrow with a deep dive into Texas A&M. Another team that everybody seems to have an opinion on these days. Probably one of the more polarizing teams in college baseball. And then next week,
Next week it is NC State and Wake Forest. We will be joined by our NC State, or we're hopefully being joined by our NC State contributor, Grayson Boone. He's planning on it, so we will have a third member next week. He'll help us break down NC State and Wake Forest. Hopefully Wake Forest gets their roster online for me so I don't lose my mind on the numbers. And
there's no Danny Corona. He's in Missouri. I forgot that existed. And then they posted about it on Twitter. So there's no Danny Corona.
Yeah. It just drove me nuts because I was trying to get ahead, and I went to look at the roster, and the first thing I saw was Lucas Costello, and I was like,
well, if I remember correctly, the SID that we met last year, he is now the SID for the MAC conference. So they have a completely new SID that they're trying to break in.
So he's probably
give
been
them
busy.
A little bit of slack.
Yep. So we're wrapping up. We are into our last 4 teams. It'll be Wake Forest and NC State next week, and then Duke and North Carolina right before the season starts. And who knows? Maybe that week we also have a surprise preview show for the opening games. I will be at UVA Hofstra for opening weekend. Jake, who knows where he'll be?
I will be at Oklahoma State Sam Houston. And I'll slide over to Texas A&M McNeese.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough for Jake to go to any ACC games being in Houston, but
there's I think I'll have to check my schedule, but I think that there's gonna be a weekend where I go and hit up NC State, UNC, and Wake. I forget who Wake plays.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a fun time. So we'll see you guys next Wednesday. It'll be back to hopefully our normal time at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. We'll see you next week.
Of course. And then one more thing, in season, we're going to be around here at the same time, breaking down every ACC. So if you think you're getting rid of us after next week, you're sorely mistaken.
Take it easy.
Hey, everybody.